The text came in at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday. I was lying in a hospital bed in Vancouver General, my left arm in a temporary splint, waiting for the surgeon to confirm whether the fracture needed pins or just a cast. My ribs hurt when I breathed too deep. The nurse had just dimmed the lights in my room and told me to try to rest. I had my phone in my right hand because it was the only thing I could do, just hold it and stare at the ceiling and wait. I'd called my parents twice. No answer the first time. The second time, my dad picked up on the fourth ring. He didn't ask if I was okay. He said, "Where are you calling from?" I said, "A hospital. Dad, I was in an accident. My car got hit on the Granville Bridge. I think my arm is broken and they want to do a procedure tonight." There was a pause. I heard my mother's voice in the background, low, asking something. Then my dad said, "Is it serious or are we talking like a cast and go home?" I said, "I don't know yet. They said they might need to put pins in. I think they might need to put pins in. I think they need someone here, or at least someone to be reachable." Another pause. Longer this time. "Tess," he said, "we're in the middle of something. Can this wait until morning?" I didn't say anything for a moment. I thought maybe I'd misheard him. The pain medication they'd given me wasn't strong enough yet, and my whole left side felt like it was being slowly compressed, and I thought, did my father just ask if my emergency surgery can wait until morning? "It's an emergency procedure," I said. "They need someone." "You're 28. You can sign your own forms. You don't need us there." He wasn't wrong about that part. I could sign my own forms, but I was alone in a hospital room at midnight, and I was scared and my arm was broken in at least 2 places, and I wanted my dad. I wanted someone who loved me to be in that waiting room. That's all. "Okay," I said, "because what else do you say to that? Call us tomorrow, we'll come by." And he hung up. I put the phone down on the blanket beside me and looked at the ceiling for a long time. The fluorescent light above the bed had a small flicker in it, barely perceptible, and I counted the flickers until the nurse came back to tell me the surgeon was ready. I called my grandmother instead. She lives in Burnaby, 25 minutes from the hospital on a good night with no traffic. She was 71 years old and had a bad hip and had been asleep for 2 hours when I called her. She answered on the second ring. I said, "Grandma, I'm at Vancouver General. I had an accident." She said, "I'm getting my coat." She was there before the surgery started. I want to be very clear about something before I tell the rest of this story. My parents are not monsters. They are not people who beat their children or screamed at the dinner table or made our lives obviously miserable. They are a particular kind of difficult, which is the kind that's hard to explain to people who haven't experienced it. The kind where everything looks fine from the outside, where they show up to graduations and send birthday money and can carry a perfectly warm conversation at Christmas dinner. The kind where you spend 20 years wondering if you're being ungrateful, if you're asking for too much, if maybe you really are as low maintenance as they've always seemed to expect you to be. Growing up, my younger brother was the complicated one. He had ADHD and some learning differences that needed a lot of time, a lot of advocacy at school, a lot of appointments and meetings and energy. I understood that. I still understand it. But there's a version of being the easy child that slowly teaches you that your needs are optional, that if you're not visibly falling apart, you're probably fine, that asking for help is a burden, and you should only do it if you're really, truly, last resort, desperate. So by the time I was in my mid-20s, I had become very good at being fine. I had a job I liked, project coordination at a mid-sized construction firm in downtown Vancouver. I had a 1-bedroom apartment in East Van that I paid for myself, nothing fancy but mine, with a little balcony where I kept tomato plants in the summer. I had friends, a routine, a life. I did not call my parents unless I had good news to report, or they called first. The only loose thread, the thing I had never gotten around to fixing, was a document I'd signed when I was 23. My dad had brought it up casually over dinner one night. He and my mom were updating some of their financial documents, and he said it would be smart planning for me to set up a medical and financial power of attorney as well, just in case something happened while I was young and on my own. He said he'd had his lawyer draw up something straightforward. I read it, or I thought I read it, and it seemed standard enough. It named my parents as my agents in the event I was incapacitated and unable to make decisions for myself, meaning unconscious, in a coma, mentally incapable, not just inconvenienced, actually unable. I signed it because I was 23 and I trusted my parents and the lawyer was right there and it seemed like the adult thing to do. I didn't look at it again for 5 years. The surgery that night went fine. A radial fracture with a small displacement. They put in 2 pins, cast my arm from below the elbow, sent me to recovery around 2 a.m. My grandmother was asleep in the chair beside my bed when they wheeled me back in. She woke up immediately, took my right hand in both of hers, and didn't say anything, just held on. I started crying then, not from pain, but from the relief of having someone there. I hadn't cried once the whole night until that moment. She stayed until 6 a.m., when the morning shift started and a nurse gently suggested she go home and rest. Before she left, she smoothed the blanket over me and said, "I'm going to bring soup tonight, the real kind, not the can." My parents came by the next afternoon. They brought flowers. A gas station bouquet, the cellophane kind, slightly wilted, and my dad stood at the foot of the bed looking vaguely guilty and said, "See, you were fine." I looked at him. I said, "I know." My mother asked if the hospital food was decent. I said it was fine. They stayed for about 40 minutes, and then my dad said they had somewhere to be, and they left. My grandmother arrived 40 minutes after that with a container of chicken soup and a library book she thought I might like and a small succulent and a terracotta pot because, she said, "It'll be nice on your desk when you go back to work." I was discharged 2 days later. My grandmother picked me up. She'd already called my building's superintendent to let him know I'd need some help with the door for a few weeks, and she'd stocked my fridge before coming to get me so I wouldn't have to worry about groceries. I sat in her car in the hospital parking garage and thought, this is what it's supposed to feel like. The cast came off 6 weeks later. I went back to work, caught up on the project files I'd missed, got my arm strength back slowly. Life normalized. I didn't think about the hospital night very much, because thinking about it made me feel something I didn't have a clean name for. Something between grief and embarrassment and a low, persistent anger I didn't know what to do with. What I didn't know, during all of this, was that my parents had been busy. I found out because of a letter. It came to my apartment on a Thursday morning about 4 months after the accident. A registered letter from a financial institution I had never done business with. It was addressed to me. I signed for it, stood in my hallway, opened it. It was a notice about a line of credit. A $28,000 line of credit that had been opened in my name, secured against my registered assets, with my address on file and my SIN number and my signature, or something that claimed to be my signature on the application. I had never applied for any line of credit with this institution. I had never even heard of this institution. I sat down on my hallway floor. I read the letter 3 times. Then I took a photo of it and called my best friend, who works in banking, and read it to her out loud. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, very carefully, "Tess, do you know if anyone has access to your financial documents? Like, legally?" My stomach dropped. I pulled up the POA document that night. I read it properly this time. All of it, not skimming. It named my parents as my agents with fairly broad authority over my financial accounts and assets. The clause I had apparently missed at 23 was that the power didn't require me to be incapacitated to be used. It was what's called a non-springing power, meaning it was active immediately upon signing, not conditional on my incapacity. A non-springing POA. I had signed a non-springing POA and not realized it for 5 years. My parents had legal authority over my finances right now, today, without me being in a coma or a hospital bed or anywhere but my own kitchen reading a letter. And someone had used my SIN number, my address, my registered assets, and presumably that authority, to open a line of credit I knew nothing about. I did not call my parents. I called a lawyer. Her name was listed on the BC Law Society's referral service, Family and Estates, available for a consult that Friday. I went to her office on West Hastings with the letter, and a printed copy of the POA and my hand shaking slightly in my lap. She read both documents. She asked me a few questions. She pulled up some information on her computer. Then she turned to me and said, "The good news is that this is revocable. You can revoke this power of attorney at any time as long as you're mentally competent, which you clearly are. The process is straightforward. We can prepare the revocation documents today if you'd like." "Yes," I said. "Please. The other matter, the line of credit, is a separate issue and may involve the fraud department at the institution and potentially the police. I'd recommend contacting the lender directly first and flagging it as unauthorized, and keeping records of everything." I spent the next 2 weeks doing exactly that. I won't go through every step because it's tedious and procedural and involves a lot of hold music, but the summary is, the line of credit was flagged, an investigation was opened, and the institution temporarily froze it pending review. My lawyer filed the revocation of the POA. I had the documents witnessed and notarized and sent by registered mail. I named my grandmother as my new agent. She cried a little when I asked her, and then she said, "I'm honored, but I really hope we never need this." "Me too," I said. "But I'd rather it be you." The investigation turned up what it turned up. I'm not going to say here, in detail, what my parents did or didn't do, because some of it is still being sorted out through legal channels. What I will say is that the authority they held on paper was real, and it had been used, and I had not known about it. And that is entirely a consequence of a document I signed without fully understanding it at 23. There's a thing that happens when you're the easy child. People stop checking in because you never seem to need anything. And after a while, you stop expecting to be checked in on, and you start filling in the gap yourself, quietly, without drawing attention to it. Psychologists call it something like emotional self-sufficiency as a trauma response. You've learned that your needs won't reliably be met. So you stop having needs, or at least stop showing them. You become very functional. You become the person who handles things. And from the outside, it looks like resilience. I don't think it's resilience. I think it's loneliness with a good PR strategy. I know that now because of what happened when I stopped performing it. After the revocation was filed and the accounts were secured, I had a conversation with my parents. I want to be honest about this. It wasn't a dramatic confrontation. There was no screaming, no throwing things, no satisfying moment of watching someone finally understand the damage they'd done. My dad talked a lot about how they had expected me to be informed, how they had assumed I knew, how things had gotten complicated. My mother cried. I sat at their kitchen table and listened, and felt very far away from both of them, like I was watching the conversation through a window. I brought a folder. Inside, it was a copy of the revocation of the POA, a letter from my lawyer, and a printed summary of the account activity that had been flagged. I slid it across the table. My dad looked at the folder. He didn't open it. He said, "What is this?" I said, "It's documentation. You should have a copy of where things stand." That was all. No speech. No list of grievances. No ultimatum delivered with a shaking voice. Just a folder on a table, slid across cleanly, and the look on my dad's face when he realized that this was not a conversation where I was asking for an explanation or waiting to be talked out of anything. This was a conversation where I was informing them of something that had already been decided. I drove home afterward and sat in my car in the parking lot of my building for a while. I wasn't upset, exactly. I was tired in a way that felt different from regular tiredness, like something I'd been carrying for a very long time had been set down, and my body didn't quite know how to redistribute the weight yet. My grandmother called that evening. She said, "How did it go?" I said, "It went." She said, "Come for dinner Sunday. I'll make the soup again." I said, "Okay." There's practical stuff I want to mention, because I spent a long time afterward reading about POAs and realizing how little most people know about the difference between a springing and non-springing power of attorney, and I think it matters. If you have ever signed one, or if someone has asked you to sign one, please read the activation clause. A springing POA only activates if you become incapacitated. A non-springing POA is active immediately. Both are legal, but they are very different documents with very different implications, and the difference is usually buried in one paragraph that looks like boilerplate. You can also limit the scope. You don't have to give your agent authority over everything. You can specify which accounts, which decisions, which scenarios. You can require co-signers. You can build in a review period. A good lawyer will walk you through all of this. And if someone hands you a document and says, "It's just standard," that is the exact moment to read it most carefully. I'm not saying don't trust your family. I'm saying that trust and legal authority are not the same thing, and they shouldn't be treated as if they are. I renewed my lease in the spring. I promoted a junior coordinator on my team who'd been doing excellent work and deserved the recognition. I found a therapist who specializes in family of origin stuff, which is a particular kind of exhausting and useful work that I'd been putting off for years. I joined a ceramics class on Thursday evenings, mostly because my grandmother mentioned she'd always wanted to try it, and I thought we could do it together. And we do. We go every week and make lopsided bowls and drink tea out of a thermos she brings, and it's the best 2 hours of my week. My parents and I don't have much contact right now. I haven't officially announced anything or sent a letter explaining my feelings. I just stopped making myself available in the ways I used to. I stopped being the one to reach out first, stopped rearranging my schedule around their plans, stopped performing wellness for their comfort. The distance that opened up was mostly a result of me simply not filling in the gap anymore. It's quieter than I expected, lonelier in some moments. But it's an honest kind of lonely, one I chose, with clear eyes, rather than one that was handed to me and then dressed up as normalcy. My grandmother came with me to my last lawyer's appointment, the one where we confirmed the POA was fully in order with her as my named agent. Afterward, we went for dim sum at a place she's been going to for 30 years on Victoria Drive. She ordered everything: hargao, siumai, turnip cake, the fried taro dumplings I always eat too many of. And halfway through the meal, she put down her chopsticks and looked at me and said, "You know what I think?" I said. "What?" she said. "I think you were always going to be okay. I just wish you'd had to work less hard for it." I didn't know what to say to that, so I just reached across the table and squeezed her hand. She squeezed back. Outside, it was raining the way it rains in Vancouver in April. Not hard, just steady. The kind that's been going on all day and will probably continue until tomorrow morning, without anyone making much fuss about it. We finished the food and split the bill and walked out to her car, and she drove me home. I stood on my balcony that evening with a cup of tea, watching the rain come down on the street. The tomato plants weren't out yet, still too early in the season, but I'd been thinking about what to grow this year. Maybe something different. Something I'd never tried before. I went inside and wrote it down so I wouldn't forget. I've thought a lot about the version of me that signed that document at 23. She wasn't naive exactly. She was just trusting in the way you trust when you haven't yet learned what it costs. There's a cause and effect to everything that happened, and I don't mean that in a fatalistic way. I mean it practically, plainly. I signed something I didn't fully read, and that created an opening. My parents made choices with that opening, and those choices had consequences. I found out, and I made different choices, and those had consequences too. None of it was random. All of it followed from something that came before. What I wish someone had told me earlier is that being good, being the kind of person who tries to act with integrity, who doesn't want to hurt people, who gives the benefit of the doubt, doesn't protect you from being taken advantage of. It actually can make you more vulnerable to it if you're not also paying attention. Goodness without awareness is just exposure. I had to learn that the hard way, sitting on my hallway floor reading a letter from a financial institution I'd never heard of. The clarity I needed didn't come from anger, though the anger was there. It came from actually understanding what had happened, reading the documents properly, talking to a lawyer, learning the difference between a springing and a non-springing POA. Intelligence, real practical intelligence, isn't just being smart in school or quick in conversation. It's knowing how things actually work. It's reading the fine print at 23, or at least finding someone who will. I didn't have that then. I do now, and I'll have it for the rest of my life. The hardest part wasn't the legal process. The legal process, once I started it, was almost a relief. Concrete steps, clear outcomes, forward movement. The hardest part was deciding to move at all. There's a particular kind of paralysis that comes from loving people who are hurting you. You keep waiting for a version of events where you don't have to act, where they come around, where it turns out to be a misunderstanding. I waited longer than I should have, not because I was weak, but because cutting through that kind of confusion takes something real. A steadiness that doesn't flinch when things get hard. A willingness to keep going even when you're not sure what's on the other side. My grandmother has that steadiness. She's had it her whole life, quietly, without making a fuss about it. She got in her car at midnight for me. She stocked my fridge. She came to the lawyer's office. She orders the taro dumplings and splits the bill and calls to check in on Sundays. She didn't do any of it dramatically. She just did it consistently, every time. I think about the folder I slid across the table to my parents. I didn't do it with satisfaction. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt clear, which is different. Clarity isn't a feeling. It's a condition. It's what you have when you finally stopped arguing with what's true. I don't know exactly what the next few years look like with my family. That's still unfolding. But I know who I'll call if something goes wrong. And I know, now, how to read a document before I sign it. That feels like enough to build on.